Welcome back, everybody, to your, kind of daily update on the state of the Malazan Empire. And we're once again stuck in the dungeon that I call my home because it's dark outside and I'm too slow, apparently, because, life. Which still sucks, but that's not what we're here for. This is not the me complaining about all my fuck-ups video. This is me talking more about Orb, Sceptre, and Throne by Ian Cameron Esselmont. And this one is about chapters 6 and 7, the rest of book 1, which is Orb. So tomorrow we're going to start chapter 8 and 9 and 10, I think. If I look at, pages and shit. And that would be obviously for book Sceptre that we're going to talk about tomorrow. But, that's tomorrow, so let's start with today, shall we? Cheers. Alright, so we kind of get more of the same kind of thing going on here. We don't have much new Segule stuff going on. We get a few more callbacks to characters that we've met before in Stephen Erickson's writing, and so forth. And there's a few themes that I want to talk about. But, callbacks and things that reinforce what happened in the previous chapters, that kind of thing, right? So, I guess we'll start with one overarching theme that we'll see both in the ANSI plotline and in a new one that is made, started out, and that is about, is it Fist Cass? Whatever. The guys in Pale. In general, that is something that has always been within Malazan books, whether it's the ones by Erickson or the ones by Esselmont, and that is the issue of national trauma. I don't want to call it national because I feel it's the wrong word, but the problem is we're talking about an empire and people that are sort of outside the empire, maybe, and we're talking about how that kind of thing, like all that conquest and shit, how that impacts a culture, how that impacts how people look at their lives, how people look at everything. And there's obviously prejudices. There's also well-founded prejudices and so forth. So that's sort of one thing that we see here in a bunch of situations. We see it in a conversation that ANSI has with Orchid, whoever she is, and we at the end of chapter 7 we have serious questions for that young lady. But that's not the point. The point is we have that conversation there when she realized that ANSI is a bridge burner. It's like, yeah, you Malazans are all barbarians, doing all barbaric shit and killing people. Well, I mean, technically they were. And what constitutes barbarism is something that is very much up for debate in a lot of ways. And that's sort of where we are there. It's like her calling him a barbarian. And then we have that other situation, which is the situation in Pale, where we have the idea that the Malazans have obviously conquered Pale, and we've seen that happen in Gardens of the Moon, and they're sort of the occupiers, and we have discussions on what makes an occupation. We have the conversation of the Fist with that captain from Seven Cities, where he realizes that, yeah, hey, her home country was very much fucked over by the Malazans several times in brutal ways. So we have that ongoing and there's two discussions that we're going to have here about different things, but I feel the important bit here to understand is that even within such an empire, ethnic tensions or other group tensions because of events in the past will continue. Technically, that Fist and that Seven Cities captain are on the same side, but those wounds of the past are still there. And that is important to understand. That is very much important to understand because it's something that we have today as well. And it's something that I guess we still try to figure out, or a lot of us still have trouble with accepting that, even though actually, we don't have actual slavery right now. The wounds of slavery are still there in the past. or, well, other like horrific things like in Germany. Like, we are no longer committing mass murder, but those wounds will stay with us. Well, I mean, will stay with the people that the Nazis killed. Jews, homosexuals, people with disabilities, and a lot of other undesirables, so to speak, to use their term. Like, those wounds will stay with those groups of people forever. That shit's not going to go away. And why it's obviously not the best way to blame current generations for the stuff their like ancestors did. It is still important for the people, for current people, for people like us, like me, to be aware of the fact that that shit happened and those wounds are still there. And that's something that we can see here in these different aspects that, like, yeah, even though Fist Kess, that is his name, Kess, I think it's his name, did not personally subjugate, conquer, subjugate, and terrorize the 7 cities people, that wound is still there. And that's an important aspect that we see here. It's the same with Ansi and Orcus. Like, Ansi did not personally attack Darujistan. He didn't, well, I mean, Darujistan was never actually conquered, so good one there, but still, that did not actually happen. Ansi did not actually do that to Orchid. But the wounds are there. And that past and that history is there. And it's something that we always should be aware of. Now, we should always be respectful about and understand that. It's like, don't feel personally attacked. And that, I guess that's the interesting thing that we see here, and what Esselman gets right about it, which I personally really appreciate, is how in that first situation, when he realized that first, for a second, Fist Cass is like insulted, and then he realizes and steps back a second, like, oh right, shit, I should not have said that, because that was like very, very, no, I was not very tactful, to put it mildly. And it kind of the same with Ansi, although he chooses more like resignation, I guess. But the point is, what we tend to do, or what I hope I don't, at least if I think about it for like half a second, which sometimes happens. If someone accuses a specific group, my specific group of people, which is white Germans, I guess, of stuff that our specific group has done in the past, I am not personally insulted by that, but I accept that those wounds are there, so I will not act like I was personally insulted. And that is something that I feel a lot of us could learn from in the future, right? Just saying. So there's that one thing that I found very interesting, because it's one of those incredibly important things that we need to be aware of, especially people like me in the sort of northwestern hemisphere. Does that make sense? Northwestern isn't really a hemisphere. You know what I mean. Basically, Europeans and North Americans that were like, we should be aware of the fact that over the last, 500, 600, 700 years, depending on which part we're talking about, we have, like, we being, that group of people that come from basically Europe, we have fucked up a lot of people. There's a lot of, like, justified reservation or a lot of wounds that we have caused over the time, and we should be aware of that. I don't feel personally guilty for that, but it helps to understand that those wounds are there. And so I appreciate the fact that that is in this book, and it's really good to have that there. Also, I feel it kind of helps that Cam Esselman is a bit more direct when he talks about such things than Stephen Erickson sometimes is. Because as much as I love a very, very symbolic or whatever way to deal with such topics, they are way too important to not actually hammer them home as often as possible, because we as people tend to forget. We're not smart. And yeah, so first big theme in here that I really appreciated, that it is them. We've seen it in other situations as well, that those like ethnic tensions, they are there. You have the review who are once again trying to, arm against the threat of the Malazans and stuff like that. Those tensions, those ethnic tensions caused by expansion, caused by imperialism, they are the Malazan heritage at this point. It'll stay. It's there. You can work at it. You can work at, trying to be better. Not that the Malazans are particularly doing that. But in theory, you can do that. But that doesn't make anything that happened before, that doesn't undo any of the damage, necessarily. Or if it does, it takes for fucking ever. So yeah, there's your first bit of, like, me being a bit agitated for today. There'll be more. Now let's keep looking at the Ansi Moonspawn plotline. And it is continuing these aspects of what I said before, what I would call a survival horror, with like tropes that we have seen before. Like they run into that cannibal village, because of course they do. It's one of those things that you expect in these kind of, you get lost in a very, very out of the way place, and you run into that group of, to put it mildly, weird people living there, and they have, well, in this case, they're cannibals. I'm pretty sure that, I mean, there's other horror books and movies out there where exactly the same thing happens. Here it is, those people that are left behind, and we'll see where all of that is going. We also have that other part that is important for that group survival horror, which is we add a bit of mystery to some of the people. Apparently, Orchid can do Teist Andy magic by now. We don't know exactly why. We have that tension building up between the Malazan and the and Orchid, Ansi and Orchid, because of their past. We have the mysterious and even more mysterious and dangerous guy being Malachi. We have our first wounded, who is, Corian. Well, he gets healed, but still, we have all these things. They're like already dragging their way through there. Facing all kinds of horrible, macabre scenes with that group of dead people, whom we don't exactly know what killed them, because maybe it was that guardian, maybe it was something else, who the fuck knows. But that's sort of what we have here in Moonspawn. We get a bit of background. However, this is also like the kind of horror that is all about greed and the critique of greed, and capitalism is always kind of connected to greed, because it is. But we see that whole idea that this is sort of everyone on that place is basically exploited to the uttermost by those people that actually run what is called the Golden Gap of Gold, whatever. That place where you can actually get off, where they just take all your stuff and just leave you there or kill you. So we get a bit of like an overall layout of what will happen in Moonspawn, how it will happen. We have that like whole, it's a labyrinth. At this point, it's a labyrinth, a deadly labyrinth with a end fight laid out for us, which is sort of, your crazy Hunger Games or whatever style competition thing that you have as a genre or subgenre in a lot of other, novels and books and whatnot, where you have to go through that entire parkour, face all the tests, and if you're lucky, you'll survive, and that's it. Survival horror, as I said, which with a bit of action in there. And the fact that there's all these tensions within the group, within that group of characters, adds to the dangers and adds to the tension, the overall tension in that subplot. And we'll see where all of that will continue to go in the next book when we find out more about it. So far, it's Moonspawn. It's fucked up. No one's there that is like worth anything as a human being, except maybe Ansi and Orchid and the other two. We'll see where all of that will be going. I'm looking forward to it. Now let's have a look at other parts of the novel, shall we? All right. There's that plot line about two Segula looking for everyone's favorite Grandmaster of Sweepers, Dassem Ultor, also known as Decembre and Traveler and a whole other slew of names, and they run into this like mountain bandit home. And most of that is not really interesting, apart from showing us how ultra crazily strong and whatnot the Segule are. Well, what I found an interesting aspect, and a very good aspect of this novel here, is the situation where, is it Yusek? Something like that. The girl. And the discussion of sexual abuse and who is to blame for that and who is not. The very clear stance that we have here that it is never ever an abuse victim's fault if they get sexually abused. It's always the abuser's fault, and in this particular case, it's obviously a man and women thing. But it obviously transfers to all other forms of abuse and sexual abuse in all other gender configurations that you can think of. It's just discussed here in a female, male, men and women situation, which still is arguably the most common version of it. So it makes sense. And we have heard that so often. The whole idea of victim blaming and so forth, that happens and has happened forever and ever and ever. So having both Yusek, if that is her name, say it's not my fault if those people can't actually control their, sex drive at this point, or control themselves, it's not my fault. And that's pretty cool. That's understandable, and it's correct. But the fact that, on the other hand, we have Auburn sit there and say, yeah, I know it's not your fault, but there's nothing I can do about it. That's the very interesting thing, because that's something that has happened in, like, our society as well. It's like, yeah, a lot of us, I hope, like, the next step from, like, blaming women for being assaulted by people is always to say, no, you're not to blame for this, but there's nothing I could have done. And that's also obviously wrong, which is why Auburn is still wrong. And accepting it, that it is men in general that have that problem, while still not doing anything about a particular case. That's where the blame lies, right? It's like, if we, as men, are aware of something like that going on with other people, and once again, it is predominantly a man thing, but that's not excluding other situations where those kind of abuses happen. But we'll stick with the man thing for now. Point is, if we notice that's happening somewhere, it's our fucked up goddamn duty to go there and actually put a stop to it, and not just sit back like, but I couldn't have done anything about it. I know it was wrong, but I didn't do anything. So yeah, don't do that. Don't be like Auburn. He's a dickhead. Anyway, I feel it is really cool that while these themes are all over Malazan, right? The idea of how sexual abuse has to be dealt with and so forth. They are all over the Malazan universe. But it is good to have them actually spelled out as and discussed as directly as you have them here in these parts. I do very much appreciate that, once again. So yeah, there's all of that. Now, what else is important in these two chapters that I'm talking about today? We have Radek Nom trying to figure out what is going on, which is interesting because we meet people that we have met before. We get to see Raced again, and I'm always happy to see Raced. Also, really interesting that he's now hanging out with a Talan Imas and playing cards. And that Talan Imas is the one that Harlow Younger helped with the splints, I guess, in Toll the Hound. So having that bit in there, I just, really found that interesting and liked that a lot. I also want to come back to something that we have seen before, and that is really important to understand here in the Rujistan society and how politics work. Now, we know that you have the council, and you have councilmen, and then you have people supporting councilmen, paying them money to do things, and then maybe having ideas of how those councilmen should actually perform their office because you have supported them financially. We discussed the whole thing here, in this case, with Jeshin Lim and Humble Measure, whom we once again, and this is another thing that is interesting about Humble Measure. Humble Measure is a patriot. He's a fanatic, but he's also not from there. And this is something that you see, like the zeal of converts, the zeal of people, of migrants, sometimes at least, that try to actually be more patriotic than, or more enthusiastic about the group they joined than all the other people. You have that drive to prove that you are more worthy and whatnot. And you see that in politics. Look at American politics, for example. Look at German politics as well. But look at American politics. Who pays money to whatever kind of politicians? How many of those really rich people are people that aren't originally from the US and are sort of outsiders who then pay, support a specific political party or specific politicians, then get really mad at them if they don't perform the way they want and actually influence a lot. You have Humble Measure there. He wants armor. He wants a lot of armor because he thinks we need a military in Daruzhistan. Now, is he right? Well, obviously not. But but the point is, yeah, look at like how that happens in real world politics. So we have that same phenomenon. It once again is tied to that idea of a glorious past, which we do in a lot of fields. But I feel with like politics, especially nationalist politics, authoritarian politics, that drive towards and that emphasis on a glorious, archaeologically doubtful past is a huge thing, right? We have that all over Europe. You have people that are trying to, look for Romania, for example. Romania is very much trying to, at least parts of Romanian politics are very much trying to connect the country to the old tribe of the Dacians, whom we know basically nothing about, and it was certainly not the way it's portrayed in specific museums now. And you have the same thing going on all over the world, really. Where we kind of construct ourselves a specific image out of the past and connect it to our current glory or our hope to reach current glory, and that's once again a very important observation there that we see going on with Humble Measure and the idea of digging up that stuff out in the burial plains. That's the name, you're right. So yeah, I feel that connection between archaeology, history, and politics is a very tempting and very toxic one that we unfortunately are still not rid of in our enlightened age. And there's a bunch of further observations like that all over the place in this book. It was another one that I really liked. That was the idea of persecution for beliefs in a way with a spindle, and yeah, the idea that some people actually want to be persecuted for their beliefs or imagine themselves being persecuted for their beliefs because it proves they're right. Now this is obviously a very difficult topic, right? There is and has always been persecution for beliefs, whether it's religious or any other form of political or whatever beliefs. There has always been real persecution. It has, and it is still ongoing, and that is fucked up and terrible and whatnot. It, however, doesn't make your beliefs right or wrong. Because persecution is, per definition, wrong, morally wrong. There are, however, people that imagine they are persecuted, right? Let's be honest here. You have, especially in the more right-leaning part of the globe right now, or a global English-speaking society that hangs out on Facebook and Twitter, well, mostly on Facebook these days, but you know what I mean. You have these people that claim that their rights have been impinged, they are persecuted, they're the last actually fighting, and every time you actually, every time someone restricts, well, not even restricts, but reminds those people to kind of behave like normal people, they'll feel justified in their, political views, and they'll use that claim, that imagined persecution, that imagined cancellation, or what have you. They use that to prove that they're right. that their beliefs are right, which they are not. Or even if they may be right, and I'm saying that because they are not. But the point is, even if those beliefs were right, the persecution doesn't prove that. It just that's a different category, so that doesn't work. But it is certainly a thing that we can see in all over the place in our lives. So having that bit of thought put in there with Spindle when he sits there and is waiting for a contact from the people he's working for or not working for the Malazans, basically, that's a really cool thing. And that brings us to another thing that I personally find fascinating, and that's connected to the Spindle theme there. You can't leave the army. You can't leave the Empire. It always drags you back. Which apparently is true. And it's important to understand that because it shows that, and there's like two sides to that. The one side is it is very much an established pattern that we're seeing here. And we have seen, and we'll see it in other parts of this novel with other people as well. It's like there are specific parts of your life, specific choices you make in your life, or we make in our lives, that will stick with us, no matter how fucking hard we try to distance ourselves from them. They will stick with us. One of them is, for example, joining the army. Probably the same with joining a police force. It's very difficult to get out of that in a way where, even if you stop being a soldier, even if you stop, physically actually getting paid for your job, that will stick with you. You will always be seen as part of that group. Once again, we've seen movies about like samurai trying to give it up or living somewhere trying to live peacefully, and then their past comes back and haunts them even more. Or soldiers or cops or whatever. Criminals, obviously, as well. It's very much like a theme of the former hitman, the former crime boss or whatever, trying to live a peaceful life, and then the past comes back and they're back in there and they have to do what they do best because it's sort of in their nature at this point. And then you have that conflict between trying to not be that person anymore and having to do it for the right reasons, the morally right reasons, doing the wrong things anyway, and so forth. It's an established pattern. It's something that we see here again and again as well. We have a lot of people, both in this novel and in other Malazan novels, trying to leave their past behind, trying to be different people. We have Traveler, that's tried a long time. He's now in his monastery, sweeping floors, and he doesn't want to be a fighter anymore. He tries to leave that shit behind. We have Kaladin Brood trying to do the same fucking thing. Will it work? Well, probably not. And on a lesser level, and this I feel is a very important aspect of the Malazan world in general, but also of, it's a general thinking, it works in theme really well in Malazan novels and here, is that you have these mirrors, basically. It's a theory on which, like, terrible medicine and alchemy and all kinds of other shit was built and founded in medieval times. That's the macrocosm, microcosm idea, right? It's like as above, so below. Sort of that idea. Those are different things about they kind of go towards the same end, which is that our body, like what happens on the macro level in our bodies and whatnot, is mirrored by what happens above there with the stars, the whole heavens. That's how astrology kind of works. Well, it doesn't, but you know what I mean. Point is, we have a similar thing going on here, because we see on the smaller level, in the rather small level, we have people trying to give it up, not being able to, because their past will come back to haunt them. We have Ralik trying to no longer be an assassin. We have those Malazan deserters trying to no longer be Malazan soldiers. Doesn't work. We have, on the high power level, we have literal fucking gods, December, and, well, it's kind of difficult to call Kaladin Brood a god, but literal fucking ascendants trying to no longer be those kind of people, and it comes back for them. So that whole idea of, like, can you become a new person? Can you become a different person? is something that we see here a lot, because up to a point in the most brutal version of it, we see the same thing mirrored in what happens to Baruch, right? Baruch gets taken and gets turned back into the demon Baruchanal, if that's a demon or whatever he is, right? He gets turned back into Baruchanal, who he has spent the last couple of hundred, possibly thousands of years trying to not be anymore. Vorkon is probably doing the same thing as well. I don't know, because I know because I've read the book before, but we're not going to talk about that yet because we're not there yet. But you have that idea of trying to escape a path, trying to escape a part of our personality that we don't want to be anymore. And that's a very, in all these stories that I just mentioned, your crime novels, your war novels, well, it is always also, it rings so true and it works so well, I feel, for like as a form of media with us, because we as humans have the same issue, right? It's like, I've been a terrible person when I was younger. I probably still am a terrible person, but there's parts of like my personality that I am trying to no longer, that I'm trying to leave behind, that I've always tried to leave behind. And I guess most of us have those parts of our personality, our behavior patterns and whatnot that we've had in our past that we are no longer very proud of and are trying to no longer exhibit. And that's why that kind of resonates with us, and we're like, yeah, that's why that like constant fight, and it is a constant fight to not fall back in established patterns of behavior, right? That's something that most of us have faced before, at least a significant number of us humans have faced before, and having that then like played out, like literally played out with as an actual drama, resonates with us, and that's why those kind of stories are really compelling to us. So once again, this is one of the things that we see here in Orb Sceptre Throne. We have a lot of these, a lot of similar patterns, repeated on all kinds of levels with all kinds of different people trying to leave behind their past and failing at it, mostly failing at it at least. We'll see how far we go with that in the future. But that's something that we see here, and that I feel makes Orb Sceptre Throne such a good novel. It's something that we have themes that are repeated and repeated again in all different walks of life, showing that no, these are not exemplary, or not exemplary, like these are not extraordinary people with extraordinary events. No, that happens to the smallest of us and to the largest of us. I know, look at Cole, who tried to give up drinking. There's another one, which is obviously one of the prime examples of like trying to leave a part of our past behind. Like if we haven't like had an addiction or any other form of like mental illness, or I don't want to call it mental illness, like any form of mental health issues. I don't know, eating disorders, addiction, whether it's smoking or drinking or any other form of addiction, because like let's face it, drinking is an addiction. Alcohol can be an addiction, probably is one, in most cases, at least if you do it regularly. Just saying, smoking, the same thing. Like those can be addictive, and we trying to give up smoking, trying to give up drinking, trying to leave these things behind is a continuous struggle. It's not like you stop it and like after a week you're like, I'm fine. That shit will haunt us for the rest of our lives, as do other parts of our personality. Things that we did when we were like 3 years old, they will still haunt us, and we'll still kind of subconsciously be fucking afraid that it will happen again when we're 57 years old or whatever. So that's why I feel that is so compelling, but having it also happen in all kinds of forms and variations to all kinds of different people all over the place in one novel is, once again, a really, really cool thing that I personally really appreciate about it. All right. What else to talk about? Let's make it kind of quick at this point, because I feel I've already rambled far too long. Kiska, Leoman. Well, they're still looking for Teichran. They haven't found him. They're kind of lost there. We'll see what happens in the next couple of chapters. There is something that we need to talk about at some point. I just don't feel completely confident to do it right now, because I assume there will be more on that topic in the next couple of chapters, and that is relationships. In particular, the relationship between Torvald, Nom, and Tessera on the one hand, and the other one between Silara, and Barathol. There's a lot to be said about those two. That I'm not sure, because I feel like it makes more sense to talk in more detail about those two when we have a couple of more scenes that we can talk about, and then I'll go back and pick up some of the stuff that I've just glanced over today, because oh boy, is that Barathol Silara situation fucked up. And we need to talk about that at some point. Anyway, it's Thursday night. I still need to render this whole thing, and I have a lot of terrible things to deal with in my life. So I better get on with that. Thanks for watching and all of, sticking with me. Commenting if you do, liking, subscribing, all the good stuff. Tell your friends about this if you feel like it. I'm desperately needing more subscribers. Anyway, talk to you tomorrow. Cheers.